Welcome everybody. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. My name is Michelle. I'm a recovered Al-Anon and I will be leading this meeting. We want to welcome everyone to our Al-Anon Big Book Recovery meeting. This is a step speaker meeting that meets every Wednesday night at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time or 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will study the 12 steps by using the precise instructions out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous as they relate to us as Al-Anon. To get our meeting started, the original AA preamble written by the AA Grapevine describing the fellowship in 1940. We study the preamble with an open mind and open heart to consider how it applies to Al-Anon. This helps us to stay focused on the message of recovery the pioneers intended while observing the traditions in action. Through the actions taken based on the instructions of the basic text, we comprehend what the pioneers meant when they described the membership of AA, which is that they worked a program of recovery and they no longer drank. In our case, we no longer obsess over the alcoholic. Through continuous action and study of these principles, the understanding of the value of the original preamble reveals itself. We ask for your humble consideration of our sincere admiration of the pioneers of Alcoholics Anonymous. The simple hope is that we of Al-Anon will grow into the same clarity and unity that birthed the original 12-step fellowship, because without them, after all, none of us would be here. The original AA preamble. We are gathered here because we are faced with the fact that we are powerless over alcohol and unable to do anything about it without the help of a power greater than ourselves. We feel that each person's religious views, if any, are his own affair. The simple purpose of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is to show what may be done to enlist the aid of a power greater than ourselves, regardless of what our individual conception of that power may be. In order to form a habit of depending upon and referring all we do to that power, we must first apply ourselves with some diligence. By often repeating these acts, they become habitual, and the help rendered becomes natural to us. We have come to know that as alcoholics, we suffer from a serious disease for which medicine has no cure. Our condition may be the result of an allergy which makes us different from other people. It has never been permanently cured by any treatment with which we are familiar. The only relief we have to offer is absolute abstinence, the second meaning of AA. There are no dues or fees. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. Each member squares his debt by helping others to recover. An Alcoholics Anonymous member is an alcoholic who, through the application of and adherence to the AA program, has forsworn the use of any and all alcoholic beverages in any form. The moment he takes so much as one drop of beer, wine, spirits, or any other liquid containing alcohol, he automatically loses all status as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is not interested in sobering up drunks who are not sincere in their desire to stay sober for all time. Not being reformers, we offer our experience only to those who want it. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and on which we can join in harmonious action. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our program. Those who do not recover are people who will not or simply cannot give themselves to this simple program. Now, you may like our program or you may not, but the simple fact remains that it works, and we believe it is our only chance to recover. There is a vast amount of fun included in the AA fellowship. Some people might be shocked at our seemingly worldliness and levity, but just underneath there lies a deadly earnestness and a full realization that we must put first things first, and with us the first thing is the solution to our alcohol problem. To drink is to die. Faith must work 24 hours a day, in and through us, or we perish. In order to set our tone for this meeting, I ask that we bow our heads in a few moments of silent prayer and meditation followed by the Serenity Prayer. And you can hit *6 to unmute if you'd like to join me in the Serenity Prayer. Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. I wish to remind you that whatever is said at this meeting expresses our own individual opinion as of today and as of up to this moment. We do not speak for AA as a whole, and you are free to agree or disagree as you see fit. In fact, it is suggested that you pay no attention to anything which might not be reconciled with what is in the AA Big Book. If you don't have a big book, it's time you bought one. Read it, study it, live with it, follow the directions in it, and learn what it means to be an AA. A sponsor is anyone who has had a psychic change as a result of working the steps and has the willingness to work with others. For those looking for a sponsor to guide them through the steps, please stay tuned and have your pens ready to record phone numbers immediately after the meeting. Each Al-Anon group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying the message to the Al-Anon who still suffers. This is our primary spiritual aim. Our job as a group is to provide people with a place to learn about and work the steps. It has been our experience that working the steps consistently provides us with a better standard of life. We consider all else to be an outside issue. This includes personal problems. The proper venue for sharing such problems is with a sponsor. This is, after all, where real recovery takes place, in working the steps with a sponsor. We are just so glad we are all here, and we are all here because we are not all there. There will be a period of fellowship after the meeting. If you have questions, if you need a sponsor, if you need to check in or get current, or if you want to discuss other literature, please stick around for the fellowship. That would be a better time for these subjects. So this is the fifth Wednesday of the month, and so it is my choice on what we're going to talk about, and thought we would go through and do Big Book study on the chapter Two Wives, because that was where Al-Anon was born out of. And although when this book was written in 1939, it was mainly wives that were the spouses, but this chapter could be called Spouses or True Al-Anonics. And I'm going to be starting on page 104 in the Big Book, 4th edition. With few exceptions, our book thus far has spoken of men, but what we have said applies quite as much to women. Our activities in behalf of women who drink are on the increase. There is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they try our suggestions. So, and I forgot to add to before I started that the founders recognize that alcoholism is a family disease. That, all who care about the suffering alcoholic also suffer. So the chapter to the wives is going to help us understand the alcoholic, but it's going to help us as Al-Anonics apply these spiritual principles that, we've just learned in all our affairs. So it says if they try our suggestions. So there's a lot of suggestions in this Big Book. But by suggestions, they mean a voluntary program. That's the suggestion. They don't mean that you just pick and choose what you want to do. It's a strong suggestion, kind of like if you're going to jump out of an airplane, you might want a parachute. But for every man who drinks, others are involved. The wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch, the mother and father who see their son wasting away. Among us are wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved, as well as some who have not yet found a happy solution. We want the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the wives of men who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by the ties of blood or affection to the alcoholic. So when we work this out with our sponsor, when we get done, our job is to go out and help another Al-Anonic, another one who's suffering that has an alcoholic in their life and hasn't found a solution. And this is just a solution. It's not a cure. And, back when this was written, they didn't have Al-Anon, but, wives went out and helped other wives because we understand what it's like to live with or have an alcoholic in our life. We're in a unique position to help another person who's suffering. And that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to, take this book into our community and help another Al-Anonic. As wives of alcoholics, we would like you to feel that we understand, as perhaps you can. We want to analyze mistakes we have made. We want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to overcome. And I think that's a great paragraph of hope, because it says there's nothing that we can't overcome here. No unhappiness too great. And I think that's really a great message of hope. And that's and they mean, so what they mean is no situation is going to be too difficult. They mean through our higher power. Because we can't overcome anything on our own, just like the alcoholic isn't able to stop drinking on their own. We didn't have the ability to change any more than the alcoholic through our own actions. So through that, connecting to our higher power, that's the message of hope. It says, we have traveled a rocky road. There is no mistake about that. We have had long rendezvous with hurt, pride, frustration, self-pity, understanding, and fear. These are not pleasant companions. We have been driven to maudlin sympathy, to bitter resentment. Some of us veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more. So, we may have thought, why are they treating me this way? Or why is this happening to me? And when we do that, we're focusing on ourselves, and that what leads us to kind of that misery. And our role in how we bring misery upon ourselves, just like alcoholics do, we can do that to ourselves too, by the thoughts that we roll around in our head, Our loyalty and the desire that our husbands hold up their heads and be like other men have begotten all sorts of predicaments. We have been unselfish and self-sacrificing. We have told innumerable lies to protect our pride and our husband's reputations. We have prayed, we have begged, we have been patient, we have struck out viciously, we have run away, we have been hysterical, we have been terror-stricken, we have sought sympathy, we have had retaliatory love affairs with some other man. So this paragraph reminds us that, we have a sickness too, in our mind. And these same principles that work for the alcoholic can work for us. So if we're tired of trying to manipulate the alcoholic into doing things our way, if we're tired of begging, yelling, crying, whatever it is, if we're tired of that, there is a better way, is what they're saying. Our homes have been battlegrounds, many an evening. In the morning we have kissed and made up. Our friends have counseled, chucking the men, and we have done so with finality, only to be back in a little while. Hoping, always hoping. Our men have sworn great solemn oaths that they were through drinking forever. We have believed them when no one else could or would. Then in days or weeks or months, a fresh outburst. So, maybe our homes aren't the same battlegrounds, maybe they are, but we definitely have caused problems in our homes ourselves, as well as the alcoholic, if we're being honest. This chapter helps us look not just at the alcoholic's behavior, but our own behavior as well. We seldom had friends at our homes, never knowing how or when the men of the house would appear. We could make few social engagements. We came to live almost alone. We were invited out. Our husbands sneaked so many drinks that they spoiled the occasion. If, on the other hand, they took nothing, their self-pity made them killjoys. Yeah, so, our self-pity, we can be self-pitying too, when things aren't going our way. We decide maybe we're going to be miserable and suffer because of it. Or, being manipulated when we're not getting our own way. In the same way, when things aren't going the way that we want them to, we can be killjoys as well. There There was never financial security. Positions were always in jeopardy or gone. An armored car could not have brought the pay envelopes home. The checking account melted like snow in June. Sometimes there were other women. How heartbreaking was this discovery? How cruel to be told they understood our men as we did not. So, maybe we didn't have affairs, but, we have to ask ourselves, do we ever throw back into our loved one's face, their drinking? Do we blame them for things that were wrong in our lives? The bill collectors, the sheriffs, the angry taxi drivers, the policemen, the bums, the pals, and even the ladies they sometimes brought home. Our husbands thought they were so inhospitable, joy killers, wet blankets. That's what they said. Next day they would be themselves again, and we would forgive and try to forget. We can look at this from the point of view as we criticize them versus looking at our own behavior. Sometimes it's easier to criticize others than to kind of take a good look in the mirror, and that's kind of what they're talking about there. We have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. We have told small tots that father was sick, which was much nearer the truth than we realized. They struck the children, kicked out the door panels, smashed treasured crockery, and ripped the keys out of pianos. In the midst of such pandemonium, they may have rushed out threatening to live with the other woman forever. In desperation, we had even gotten tight ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. The unexpected result was that our husbands seemed to like it. A lot of times, we lie to ourselves, that our behavior, it's the alcoholic, it's the alcoholic's behavior. It's our behavior too affects other people in the family. Perhaps at this point we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. Then we were severely criticized by our husband's parents for desertion. Usually we did not leave. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution faced us and our family. So back when this book was written, it was much more difficult for women to leave a situation. Number one, because they couldn't have bank accounts. They didn't necessarily get first pick at jobs. It was difficult to rent apartments, so that's why they probably went home to, mother or father. But for alcoholics, this is a fatal disease, and it could be fatal for us as well, but truly more so for alcoholics. And, this is a illness of the mind that we have too, that there is no cure for, but we have a solution. We don't have to continue to, live in this chaos. We began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer together. The alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pall of remorse, depression, and inferiority that settled down on our loved ones, these things terrified and distracted us. As animals on a treadmill, we have patiently and wearily climbed back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. Most of us have entered the final stage with its commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails. Sometimes there was screaming, delirium, and insanity. Death was often near. So, under these conditions, we naturally made mistakes. Some of them arose out of ignorance of alcoholism. Sometimes we sensed dimly that we were dealing with sick men. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. So here we're starting to talk about powerlessness, okay? And understanding how their powerlessness, once they start drinking, is a little bit different than our powerlessness that we'll get into in a minute. How could men who love their wives and children be so unthinkable, so callous, so cruel? There could be no love in such a person, we thought. And just as we were being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attentions. For a while, they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the new structure of affection to pieces once more. Asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. It was baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken in the men we married? When drinking, they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible that it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. So with an alcoholic, with their powerlessness, they make that firm resolution that they're not going to drink. They try and white knuckle it for however long, and then they just end up drinking again. That's what they're talking about, this cycle of powerlessness that is often repeated over and over again in alcoholism. And for us, we may make the same type of resolution that we're not going to, follow the alcoholic around, track him on his phone, his or her phone, or track this person, check in and see what they're doing with their program, make sure they get to a meeting. We might make a firm resolution that, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pursue my own interests. But eventually we can't stand it anymore, and we go back to the way we used to do things. That's our powerlessness. And even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? What had become of their judgment, their common sense, their willpower? Why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? Why was it when these dangers were pointed out that they agreed, and then they got drunk again immediately? So it's kind of cautioning us here to understand a little bit about their illness, which is a disconnect from our higher power. It's a hopeless state of mind and body. Okay? The symptom is just the drinking, and for us it's just the controlling. So they're talking about that disconnect from a higher power. These are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who has an alcoholic husband. We hope this book has answered some of them. Perhaps your husband has been living in that strange world of alcoholism where everything is distorted and exaggerated. You can see that he really does love you with his better self. Of course, there is such a thing as incompatibility, but in nearly every instance, the alcoholic only seems to be unloving and inconsiderate. It is usually because he is warped and sickened that he says and does these appalling things. Today, most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before. Try not to condemn your alcoholic husband, no matter what he says or does. He is just another very sick, unreasonable person. Treat him when you can as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill. Condemn is really a strong word, okay? We were taught to treat them with love, tolerance, and patience, like you would a sick friend. So they're asking you to see the alcoholic as someone who has cancer, who we wouldn't be unkind to because they're spiritually sick, okay? And so are we. And if we want that same type of compassion, then we need to be willing to, give that to others. There is an important exception to the foregoing. We realize some men are thoroughly bad intention, that no amount of patience will make any difference. An alcoholic of this temperament may be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. Don't let him get away with it. If you are positive he is one of this type, you may feel you had better leave. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children, especially when he has before him a way to stop drinking and abuse if he really wants, to pay the price? So, back in the day when this book was written, they didn't have Al-Anon, okay? So they're questioning the wives here, or the spouse, that if the alcoholic isn't willing to do the work, if they're just kind of manipulating you, if they're not really doing this thing, if they're not really working the steps, then it's best to let them go and get out, than to stay and have him take or her take you or the family down. It's one thing to be kind and loving, but that does not mean that we're doormats. That doesn't mean that we have to take, crap when somebody isn't really trying. The problem with which you struggle excuse me, the problem with which you struggle usually falls within one of four categories. So what we're going to talk about now is the different types of alcoholics, because alcoholism is a progressive illness. And with us, our obsession around the alcoholics didn't happen overnight either. You know, that was something that grew over time. Same thing with alcoholism. It is a progressive illness. One, your husband may be only a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he does not see it. Sometimes he is a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessary in his business. He would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of these who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics after a while. So, you know, they may not. So what they're saying here is husband number one may not be, you know, a chronic alcoholic at this point. Two, your husband is showing a lack of control, for he is unable to stay on the water wagon even when he wants to. He often gets entirely out of hand when drinking. He admits this is true, but is positive that he will do better. He has begun to try, with or without your cooperation, various means of moderating or staying dry. Maybe he is beginning to lose his friends. His business may suffer somewhat. He is worried at times and is becoming aware that he cannot drink like other people. He sometimes drinks in the morning and throughout the day also, to hold his nervousness in check. He is remorseful after serious drinking bouts and tells you he wants to stop, but when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more how he can drink moderately the next time. You think this person is in danger. These are the earmarks of a real alcoholic. Perhaps he can still tend to business fairly well. He has by no means ruined everything. As we say among ourselves, he wants to stop. So what they're saying here is this person might be a chronic alcoholic, but when someone says they want to stop, or if someone says to you, well, I want to stop following this person around or obsessing about them, doesn't mean that what they're saying is they're not ready yet. Because when you're ready to be done. You don't want to stop. And, you know, this is a step one right here. And that's worked before you come to programs. So the alcoholic is either done drinking and you're either done trying to control the situation or you're not. 3, the husband has gone much further than husband number 2. Though once like number 2, he became worse. His friends have slipped away. His home is a near wreck and he cannot hold a position. Maybe the doctor has been called in and the weary round of sanitariums and hospitals has begun. He admitted he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. He clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so. He may have come to the point where he desperately wants to stop, but cannot. His case presents additional questions, which we shall try to answer for you. You can be quite hopeful of a situation like this. So, you know, how can they say you can be quite hopeful? It doesn't sound very hopeful when you're looking at it. But what they're saying is because of this book, that there are people that had a hopeless state of mind and body that got recovered. And, you know, once you hit that rock bottom, you know, you're more able to want to change your life. 4, you may have a husband of whom you completely despair. He has been placed in one institution after another. He is violent or appears definitely insane when drunk. Sometimes he drinks on the way home from the hospital. Perhaps he has had delirium tremors. Doctors may shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Maybe you have already been obliged to put him away. This picture may not be as dark as it looks. Many of our husbands were just as far gone, yet they got well. And again, that's just a great paragraph of hope, because before AA there was no treatment. There was no hope. But, you know, now there are over 200 other 12-step programs that use this as their basic text. Let's now go back to husband number 1. Oddly enough, he is often difficult to deal with. He enjoys drinking. It stirs his imagination. His friends feel closer over a highball. Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him when he doesn't go too far. You have past happy endings together, chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you both like parties, which would be dull without liquor. We have enjoyed some evenings ourselves. We had a good time. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think it has its advantage when reasonably used. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily. You should. If you can, go without rancor. Patience and good temper are most necessary. So, they're saying that, being angry at an alcoholic because they're spiritually sick isn't really going to get you anywhere. And for us, getting angry disconnects us from God. We know that. And we don't want to get disconnected from our higher power because it's not a luxury we have. We have to show patience, tolerance, and love. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. If he gets the idea that you are a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be zero. He will use that as an excuse to drink more. He will tell you he's misunderstood. This may lead to lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, not always another man. So they're just telling us here not to get over involved in our loved one's program, which is hard to do if it's affecting our home and our lives. But what it's saying here is it isn't going to work. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have a full and useful life though your husband continues to drink. We know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. So we can see through Al-Anon that you can have a full and productive life regardless of what people are doing around you, regardless of the chaos around you. And that's a really powerful paragraph because it doesn't depend on anyone else. It only depends on our relationship with our higher power, which we get through working the steps. All right? We know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow, but you will save many a heartbreak. You can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. This may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk about his alcohol problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. Be sure you're not critical during such a discussion. Attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. When a discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book or at least a chapter on alcoholism. Tell him you have been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Say you do not want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health, that you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. So what they're saying here is, that we can't make somebody do anything they don't want to do, right? But we can, in a kind way, make suggestions out of concern or love for our loved ones. And that's what we're doing. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic. This may take patient waiting, but it will be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. So suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2, the same principles which apply to husband number 1 should be practiced. But after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to go get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else, just that would he like to. So, husband number 2, they're saying, is the is an alcoholic that has not yet been defeated. They might still have some drinking to do. And when we're working with newcomers, we qualify this. Are you ready to be done for good and all in trying to control someone? Are you ready to go to any lengths? Are you completely defeated? Are you done with this thing? Those are the things that, we ask somebody that we're sponsoring. Because if they're not at that place, if somebody isn't at that place, the rest of the steps aren't going to work. The chances are he would. Show him your copy of this book and tell him what you found out about alcoholism. Show him that as alcoholics, the writers of this book understand. Tell him some of the interesting stories you have read. If you think he will be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Then perhaps he will be interested enough to continue. If he is enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he is lukewarm or thinks he is not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered, but don't remind him of this after he has been drinking, for he may be angry. Sooner or later, you're likely to find him reading this book once more. Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him he must act, for the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery may be delayed. So sometimes we think we're helping, right? That we know how to help, and what this is cautioning us is that we can actually turn them off by trying to be overly helpful. They have to come to their own realization, when it's time for them to come. If you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck. Being certain that he wants to stop, you can go to him with this volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, but he is practically sure to read this book, and he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you will probably not have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. Cheerfully see him through more sprees. Talk about his conditions or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present this book. They can urge without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. So husband number 3 is one that's, ready. What they're saying here is that they might be defeated at this point. They maybe are looking for a change. You would suppose that a man in the 4th classification would be quite hopeless, but that is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Everybody had given up on them. Defeat seems certain, yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. There are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol that they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. The doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. In any event, try to have your husband read this book. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm if he is already committed to an institution. But can convince you and your doctor that he means business. Give him a chance to try our method unless the doctor thinks his mental condition is too abnormal or dangerous. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years we have been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. The power of God goes deep. So back when, this book was written, before AA, they didn't have anything. People kind of went to hospitals and they kind of hoped for the best. But they wanted newcomers to read this book and see how people with a hopeless state of mind and body recovered, and got better lives and stopped drinking, and how working the steps gave them a better, saner life. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, but who should be committed. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing is to lock them up, but of course a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. But sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. So what they're saying in these two paragraphs is that if the person isn't willing to work the program, we don't have to go down with them. We can work the spiritual principles in this book and have a new way of life, right? But that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for everyone. If your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions at your house. You avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. We find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. So just cautioning about, not using this as kind of a tool to embarrass your husband, but that it's okay to share what we're experiencing, as it may be a benefit to somebody else who is going through the same thing. When you have carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, you will have created a new atmosphere. Barriers will have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you socially. Same principle applies in dealing with children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it is best not to take sides in any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. Then that terrible tension which grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. So, what they're saying here is that you don't have to be embarrassed about, the person in our life anymore, or we can be honest about where we are and what we have done when we're working the principles in this book, hold our heads up high, and so do what our higher power would have us do. Frequently you have felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends that he was sick, when as a matter of fact he was tight. Avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they have a right to know where he is and what he is doing. Discuss this with him when he is sober and in good spirits. Ask him what you should do if he places you in a situation in such a position again, but be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did so. So they're talking about codependent behavior here. Making excuses for our husbands, calling work, doing those sorts of things. There's another paralyzing fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You are thinking of the disgrace and the hard times which will befall you and the children. This experience may come to you, or you may already have had it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. It may convince your husband wants to stop drinking forever, and now you know that he can stop if he will. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon to us, for it opened us a path which led to the discovery of God. So, paralyzing fear, that's normal. We don't want to think about losing jobs or being without a home. That's part of the path to discovering God, is your complete defeat and calamity. That willingness to work the program comes from pain. And seeing things differently through God's eyes in a different light can also be a blessing. We have elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. If God can solve the old age riddle of alcoholism, he can solve your problems too. We wives found that, like everybody else, we were afflicted with pride, self-pity, vanity, and all the things which go to make up self-centered person. And we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too. So they're saying that, your higher power working the steps can solve your problems. When we tried to control things on our own, it didn't work. But this program is going to show us how to allow God to work in our lives, and so we don't have that constant feeling of being unhappy, irritable, discontented. At first, some of us did not believe we needed this help. We thought on whole that we were pretty good women, capable of being nicer if our husbands stopped drinking. But it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God. Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives. When we do that, we find it solves our problems too. The ensuing lack of fear, worry, and hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. We urge you to try our program, for nothing will be so helpful to your husband as the radically changed attitude toward him, which God will show you how to have. Go along with your husband if you possibly can. So, all your problems are not going to be solved at once, right? Because we're human. We're constantly going to get separated from God, particularly when we're new. We got to watch for them when we crop up before they kind of blow up. But we're working on kind of new soil here, right? So we're planting with new soil. So it's going to take a while for that crop to come up. It's a daily program, and we have to work it every day. If you and your husband find a solution for the pressing problem you drink, you are, of course, going to be very happy. But all problems will not be solved at once. Seed has started to sprout in a new soil. The growth has only begun. In spite of your newfound happiness, there will be ups and downs. Many of the old problems will still be with you. This as it should be. The faith and sincerity of both you and your husband will be put to the test. These workouts should be regarded as part of your education, for thus you will be learning to live. You will make mistakes. But if you are earnest, they will not drag you down. Instead, you will capitalize on them. A better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. Yeah, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes for sure. And when we do, we have a program for that, right? Because we're working on our mind and adjusting how we're thinking. That's how we're going to get a new way of life. And we need to change the way that we see things. Resentment, holding on to grudges, that sort of thing didn't work for us in the past. Some of the things you will encounter are irritation, hurt feelings, and resentments. Your husband will sometimes be unreasonable and you want to criticize, starting from a speck on the domestic horizon. Great thunderclouds of dispute may gather. These family dissensions are very dangerous, especially to your husband. Often you must carry the burden of avoiding them or keeping them under control. Never forget that resentment is a deadly hazard to the alcoholic. We do not mean that you have to agree with your husband whenever there is an honest difference of opinion. Just be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. You and your husband will find that you can dispose of serious problems easier than you can the trivial ones. Next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, it should be the privilege of either to smile and say, "This is getting serious. I'm sorry I got disturbed. Let's talk about it later." If your husband is trying to live on a spiritual basis, he will also be doing everything in his power to avoid disagreement or contention. This is getting serious. What does this remind us? It reminds us to pause when agitated or doubtful, right? We pause, we stop. We don't, plow ahead like a bull in a china shop. That's kind of what we used to do, and it didn't work so well. Your husband knows he owes you more than sobriety. He wants to make good, yet you must not expect too much. His way of thinking and doing are the habits of years. Patience, tolerance, and understanding and love are the watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. Live and let live is the rule. If you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little need to criticize each other. When women carry with us a picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be, it is the most natural thing in the world, once his liquor problem is solved, to feel that he will now measure up to that cherished vision. The chances are he will not, for like yourself, he is just beginning his development. Be patient. Another feeling we are very likely to entertain is one of resentment. That love and loyalty could not cure our husbands of alcoholism. We do not like the thought that the contents of a book or the work of another alcoholic has accomplished in a few weeks that for which we struggled for years. At such moments, we forgot that alcoholism is an illness over which we could not possibly have had any power. Your husband will be the first to say it was your devotion and care which brought him to the point where he could have a spiritual experience. Without you, he would have gone to pieces long ago. When resentful thoughts come, try to pause and count your blessings. After all, your family is reunited. Alcohol is no longer a problem. and you and your husband are working together toward an undreamed of future. So yeah, we can't cure them. Love, loyalty, and we can't cure them. That's not going to work. And if we're feeling resentful about that, we've got our program too. Still another difficulty is that you may become jealous of the attention he bestows on other people, especially alcoholics. You have been starving for his companionship, yet he spends long hours helping other men and their families. You feel that he should now be yours. The fact is that he should work with other people to maintain his own sobriety. Sometimes he will be so interested that he becomes really neglectful. Your house is filled with strangers. You may not like some of them. He gets stirred up about their troubles, but not at all about yours. It will do little good if you point out and urge more attention for yourself. We find it a real mistake to dampen his enthusiasm for alcoholic work. You should join in his efforts as much as you possibly can. We suggest that you direct some of your thought to the wives of his new alcoholic friends. They need the counsel and love of a woman who has gone through what you have. So yeah, they're suggesting here that you go out and help someone too, and you can find that, that's our 12-step work. Remember, this was written before they had Al-Anon, but that's what we do now. If we are feeling angry or frustrated or whatever the fear is. It is probably true that you and your husband have been living too much alone, for drinking many times isolates the wife of an alcoholic. Therefore, you probably need fresh interest and a great cause to live for as much as your husband. If you cooperate rather than complain, you will find his excess enthusiasm will tone down. Both of you will awaken to a new sense of responsibility for others. You, as well as your husband, ought to think of what you can put into life instead of how much you can take out. Inevitably, your lives will be fuller for doing so. You will lose the old life to find a much better one. And that's really a great paragraph, thinking about what we can do for others instead of what we can always take all the time. And sometimes when we're thinking about what we can take, if we have that obsessive personality, it's never going to be enough. Perhaps your husband will make a fair start on the new basis, but just as things are going beautifully, he dismays you by coming home drunk. If you are satisfied he really wants to get over drinking, you need not be alarmed. Though it is infinitely better that he have no relapse at all, as he has been true with many of our own men, it is by no means a bad thing in some cases. Your husband will see at once that he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive. You need not remind him of his spiritual deficiency. He will know of it. Cheer him up and ask him how you can still be more helpful. So they're just warning us that there might be some slips, but if they're honestly working towards the program and working the steps, that, this might happen and we don't need to be alarmed. The slightest sign of fear or intolerance may lessen your husband's chance of recovery. In a weak moment, he may take your dislike of his high-stepping friends as one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink. We never try to arrange a man's life so as to shield him from temptation. The slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs so he will not be tempted will be noticed. Make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. This is important. If he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. If not, it had better be found out right away. Then you and your husband can get right down to fundamentals. If a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem along with everything else in God's hands. We realize that we have been giving you much direction and advice. We may have seemed to lecture. If that is so, we are sorry, for we ourselves don't always care for people who lecture us. But what we have related is based upon experience, some of it painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That is why we are anxious that you understand and that you avoid these unnecessary difficulties. So to you out there who may soon be with us, we say good luck and God bless. All right, and that is the chapter to wives. Seventh tradition, every OA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. The group does not have a payment structure in place and currently requires no overhead expenses. If you would like to fulfill Tradition 7, please direct contributions directly to the Al-Anon World Service by visiting alanon.org. For questions about this meeting, if you're looking for a sponsor, please send emails to alanonbiglookrecovery@gmail.com. Recordings can be accessed on YouTube by searching at Al-Anon Step Speaker in the YouTube search box. If you are interested in other Al-Anon meetings that follow the Big Book, please visit AlanonBigBookSolutionGroup.org. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order, but you obviously cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and for countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Now let's have a moment of silence for the Al-Anon who still suffers, followed by the Lord's Prayer or a prayer of your own choosing said in silence. And you can hit *6 if you'd like to join me for the prayer. Who loves us and keeps us sane. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I'm going to turn the recording off here.